Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher's iconic Walk in the Wilderness photograph has become a symbol for the end of industrial Britain. But Mrs Thatcher is walking on the derelict Wrightson engineering works. Wrightson was revered worldwide and renowned for the skills and the dedication of its workforce. But why were they so respected? And what created the extraordinary links between work and community that thrived here for so long?
Pride. Every job you done was a pride job. That's why it was a family firm, you know. Because everything you done was absolutely tip-top. It had to be tip-top.
It was a family, all families. You know, 3 and 4, 5 brothers worked there, and fathers. And it was expected that fathers would get the sons in. And that's what happened. It was a wonderful atmosphere at Wrightson's.
Well, it was a family firm. Everybody got on like a family. So if your father worked there, you worked there, your uncle worked there, your brother, your cousins, everybody worked there. And you went out together for a drink. You even played football together, cricket together. You even played table tennis for the club. They had a nice social club, dances, and everybody met together. And then they went to work together.
But I never will forget the comradeship in the works.
Nothing was impossible. You would succeed. And that was the environment that you had in those days. And we did succeed. But it was all about the spirit of the people.
The place was black with them coming out, the men. There's that many coming out. And before I started, you know. We were watching, that was then, I was about school age, watching those people come out of work. Never realised we were going to end up in the same place as those people.
The works were an unavoidable part of everyone's life. Connie Tunney stands outside her home in 1936 with a cousin and a friend. All 3 would soon pass through the gates at the end of the street.
Off one, and we were only working on 2 planks of wood, and we're quite high. It'd be as high as this house. No bother, just get up and do it. It was a job, you were paid for it, you got on with it.
Plus the fact I only lived round the corner, you know, and you'd fall out of bed and I was there. I mean, I only lived in 36 Britannia Street, you only had to walk down Nile Street and I was there, you know, at work, so even though I was late.
Maynard Wilson was 14 years old when he started work in 1929.
I had a friend called Cal Hunter. He wanted to go abroad to work, and he had to go for an interview in London. They only asked him 2 questions. Where did you serve your apprenticeship? Wrightson's. Under Sir Guy Wrightson? Yes. Right, and you got the job. No more questions. That was it. You got the job. That's how revered Wrightson's were.
I remember going down to London once on one of the trains going back to school, and when you got off at King's Cross, well, there was a huge, it was the entire, instead of the glass, it was a huge panel, big board, incredible. And when you got out of the train, you saw that, it made you feel quite proud.
Tremendous range of equipment that we could produce. We could turn 27-foot diameter, nearly 100-foot long. You know, there was a lot of skillful work, skillful people in Wrightson.
it gave you a sense of security. And I know, through the 70s and 80s, security came very much with a small s. But prior to then, you felt as though when you went into a company like Head Wrightson's, it was a job for life.
It all began on the banks of the River Tees in 1866, when Thomas Wrightson teamed up with Arthur Head. Wrightson was a brilliant engineer and scientist, trained at Armstrong's Newcastle Works. Nearby was a railway, plenty of iron and coal, and an eager workforce, many of them refugees from rural poverty or famine in Ireland. Here generations of baronets and boilermakers worked together to make bridges, viaducts and piers. In fact, they could make and did make almost anything at the Trafalgar Street Works, often on a vast scale. Many of these products are still in use. But Head's almost wasn't here at all. It was the start of the Great Depression. 2 neighbouring shipyards closed, and it looked like Head's was next. It was 1930, and the second baronet, Sir Guy Wrightson, was in charge.
In fact, Head Wrightson's fabrication shops were empty. There wasn't a job in. All the men were finished. The yard manager was kept on, and the apprentices were kept on, week on and week off. But Sir Guy Wrightson actually mortgaged Neesham Hall, where he lived, to keep Head Wrightson's open.
But Head Wrightson's couldn't provide work for the whole town. John Gilgallen was a moulder at the neighbouring Bonley foundry. He finished work in 1931.
And my mum said, oh, he's got a job digging air raid shelters. Now that was the first job, digging air raid shelters. And he was in Robert Street, down near the town hall. And so I went down there, and he was stood in this big hole. It was all wet. And I said, I remember saying, oh, Dad, you're too old to be stood in there, digging out. He said, oh, it's a job, it's a job. And that was all about it. But he died in the November of 39. Been too much for him, probably.
Memories of the Depression haunted a generation of workers. As a result, their later expectations of work and life were modest.
And of course came the war years, and that did change things completely. First 2 or 3 months we weren't doing anything at all. We were changing over from peacetime to wartime production. And we got so fed up, 5 of us, that we went to join up. When we got back to work, we had the biggest tousing of our careers. Don't you realise that you're in reserved occupations? You're more valuable at home than you are at the front.
So suddenly there was jobs for everybody. Even married women who had never left the hearth could go out and get a job, which had never happened since the First World War, had it?
You were conscripted there, that or the army. So my dad said, you're not going to the army, you're going to... Advisors, they want you to go, so go. You'll be all right, we all know. We look after, keep our eye on you, for your own sake.
When the women came into work, they were trained. We trained women to weld in 6 weeks. Passed a Lloyd's Class 1 test in 6 weeks. They were natural welders, the women, because they had lovely light touch, which helped them to weld.
Long hours, sometimes we done 12-hour shifts, 6 in the morning till 6 at night. And of course with the blackout you hardly saw daylight. And then you could go home and go to bed and you'd be up 2 or 3 hours because of an air raid siren. But you still have to get up and get back to work for 6 in the morning.
If you were an apprentice, you were deferred until you were 21 in the war. Of course, if you hadn't an apprenticeship, you got called up at 18. So we had to put a deferment in when the boys got to 18 that were apprentices. And I remember Mr. Shepherd saying to me, you must always be strict about these records, because remember, if you forget one and the boy gets called up and gets killed, it'll be your fault, which put the fear of God into me at the time.
Richard Wass was a fitter and turner at Head Wrightson. Like many other workers, he met his lifelong companion at work.
And I'd be going in to do a night shift, and he was finish his 2 till 10 to go home. I would do, how are you? See you tomorrow when I come in again. And that's how it was. And I wasn't the only one in that position. Other women had the, you know. I always remember that. I used to say to people, I don't know if we had time to stop and get married. You know, just 3 shifts. Then one time, if they were on days and we were on 2 till 10, we'd see them a bit more. But you weren't allowed to talk to them at work or anything like that, only when you were going in. But the bosses knew who was pairing off, you know. They knew all about us, what we were doing.
But the activity at Heads was well known further afield. The Nazis were taking reconnaissance photographs, and the site was being marked up.
The works was very badly damaged in one raid at night round here. Although it was blacked out the place, all the windows were broken, and they dropped what they called a parachute bomb near hand, and it blew all the windows and the roofs out in the works. A lot of people were sent home. They couldn't do nothing. All the labourers were sent home. All the tradesmen stayed and got things put right again.
I used to do the home guard as well. I was on 6 or 2. You were free for night time, right? You were on tonight. Tin happened a lot. And that's when I was there, when in the heritage shelter, they're all singing. There was a hell of a bang. And the head chief said, you wanted Connie up at around the town hall. I said, what for? He said, there's been houses bombed. And when I went up, it was my sister's, she lived with her mother-in-law, it was their house. She's coming out carrying a baby 3 months old, covered in rubber and muck, because what saved her was underneath the stairs. That was it.
Well, it never stopped us from working, that's the main thing. In about, 2 days, we were back doing our full-time work again, except we had no roof on. We built mines, sinkers, bombs, aircraft hangars. We built 4 or 5 of those. We built tank landing craft. And we were turning out a record, 12 a month. That was 3 a week, tank landing craft. I mean, a tank landing craft alone, with our lads across from D-Day. There's a great communal spirit among people in those days. And it was that spirit that got us through. Without it, we'd have been gone. There's no doubt about that. We'd have been gone.
Head Wrightson would play an important part in the post-war reconstruction of the country. The coal, steel and rail industries were all being nationalised, and they needed modernising. The Wrightsons' personal contacts ensured the company had a fair share of the work. After the death of their father, Sir Guy Wrightson, the 3rd Baronet, Sir John, and his brother Peter faced the huge task of turning the company round.
They were together for most of their lives, strange enough. They went to the same school, they went into the same regiment in the army, Durham Light Infantry, and then they both worked for Head Wrightson for all their working life, really. It was a perfect time if you were in business, in engineering in those days, there was a tremendous demand. And I think that after the Second World War, and certainly right through the 50s, where there was a lot of growth, and the 60s, they were the sort of boom times.
But without Head Wrightson's renowned apprentice school, the company would not have met the demands of rebuilding post-war Britain. In 1952, Heads took apprentices on a trip to London, and it was typical of the firm's paternalism. They met their MP, visited Parliament, a show, and saw an exhibition about Leonardo da Vinci at the National Gallery. The company's future lay with the talents of people like them.
And I think if we wanted to man the kind of range of things that Head Wrightson was doing, it was absolutely essential to take on boys who'd done reasonably well at school, hopefully better than reasonably well at school, and who wanted to be tradesmen. Because without that, at that time, you couldn't man the works.
If you served your time at Head Wrightson's, you could go to any firm in the country or any firm in the world and you would get a start because you were skilled.
So we got the place, and I suppose, one of the things is that a lot of mining fathers have one ambition for the son, is not to go down the pit. And so they got me at Head Wrightson's. And they were quite proud of that.
When you were serving your time there, the first thing you did on a morning was on top of the roof doing PE. So they kept you fit before they started your instructions in the apprentice school.
The culture then, the direction then was get an apprenticeship. But within engineering, I didn't know what branch of engineering to have an apprenticeship in. And that's why I thought the apprentice school was such an excellent idea, because it exposed you to all facets. And you were then, with some guidance, given almost a free choice of what you wanted to be as an apprentice. And I suppose I was a little bit mercenary and motivated by earning money, and welders earned the best money in those days. So as far as I was concerned, I was going to be a welder.
The works then, my first job in the works was in the iron foundry. The iron foundry was a bit bleak. It was terrible. It was going into hell. I said to a gentleman, "Where's the toilet, please?" He said, "Toilet." There was no toilets in them days. It was just a long trough with a plank across. You had to sit on there, do your business, and then they set the waster light. When you went along and you burned your behind, and you jumped up and your behind was well, that was my initiation to go to start to work, getting your bottom burned.
Your chosen profession was chosen after a long standing of going to different parts of the company, and then your heart said, yes, you want to be a plater. So, and that's where you went.
So I decided I didn't want to be a moulder. So I changed me. I said, right, I'm going to be a welder. Well, a welder was a decent wage. The top men were getting in 52, they were getting top welders on piecework, were getting £10 a week. Well, I said, well, I'm going to be one of them. My wage was only about £2 odd. So I decided to be a welder. Professional footballers were only getting £10, and a welder was getting £10, which was a good wage at that particular time at 52. So I decided, right, I'm going to be a welder.
There was a remarkable school of people, if you like, in authority. And there was absolute respect paid by the people who were in the apprentice school to the discipline that they got and the authority that was around at that time. And it also encouraged you to aspire, so you had opportunities within the company. If there was an opportunity to grow and the company saw you capable of growing, then there was always that opportunity to grow into something more than you first set out.
As apprentices, we were working 5 days a week, Saturday mornings and Sundays, and 2 nights over, and then going to night school as well. and we were only apprentices, so there was a lot of work around. You had to, in the early 50s, you had to learn quickly because you were doing a man's job when you were a boy.
Charles Tighe's talents found him a post in the Research and Development Department as a welding engineer,
which involved more of the theoretical aspects of welding and metallurgy as opposed to the practical aspect of welding. So that's what I decided to do. After a couple of weeks or a couple of months of this, I'd realised that I could be missing out on my earning potential in the bridge yard as an apprentice welder, and I asked the bridge yard manager if I could have my job back. And quite a formal interview, knocked on the door, stand to attention in front of his desk, and yes, what do you want? I've come for my job back, Mr. Kane. You've come for your job back? You work in R&D now? Yes, I know, but they don't pay very good money there. I want to be back as a welder in the bridge yard. Get out of my office, I'll clip me bloody ear for you. Go on, get out now, go on. So that was it. Hence a career in welding engineering.
Charles now runs a leading specialist welding contractor, but his head Wrightson experience represented a solid grounding. Today his company, QA Weldtech, is a major exporter. Teesdale had all the facilities on site, and it was constantly evolving. They even had their own steel foundry for making high-quality castings. But crucial to the success was Major Miles. The general manager had steered the company, often through turbulent years. You could find generations of precise skills at Teesdale. Just one example is the pattern shop, where accurate wooden patterns were made before moulding in metal.
It was all done in the bridge yard, which was a complex setup, really. Starting from template making, from the template shop, the templates came to the young lads to mark off the beams, the joists. We used to have wooden templates, put them on the beams, popped holes in them for the drillers to drill out, and that was shipped to different parts of Wrightson to be built. It was rather complex, but it worked like a dream.
And they built this aluminium bridge, and it was a cantilever bridge. And the day before, they brought the cantilevers together and dropped this pin in, and it wouldn't go in. Mid-afternoon. So everybody was panicking except the fitter. He said, "Get about it, you're all right." Well, the top people in they got to know it, and he said, "Oh, don't worry." He said, "It's only the expansion. It's read out day to day." Sure enough, next morning, said, bang, straight in.
And the first things we did, we made tank landing craft. These boats run to the shore, this thing come down and the tanks run off. And they had to be able to, they were made with it absolute, within a thousandth of an inch. They said, "Would you like to be there trying to get the pin in and the bombs dropping all around you?"
Some of the women workers stayed on after the war, although their wages were often half that of the men.
The noise. Oh God. And you know, well, what they're doing and what are they doing? Where do you walk and where were you safe to walk? There was a lad called Shanks Stevenson, and I was his mate. And he said, "Oh, I'll just pick that drill up." You know, heave it on your shoulder, and then he carried the tube, the pipe that the wind would come through. And right, we're going down here to work. very few men down there that you could say weren't gentlemen. They were all canny lads, and they all treat you all right.
My father went mad. I'd went and got the job without asking him, and when I told him, he went absolutely crackers. He said, you just going to tell him you're not going? I said, I start Monday, you know, so... But it was really a good job. I really enjoyed it.
British Rail was replacing outdated rolling stock. Heads built thousands of wagons to replace it. And specialist stock was also being made for export. Kath Harrison started in 1951.
Well, the railway wagons used to be lined up in the bridge yard, and as you sort of drilled the floor of one, you'd jump out and get into the next one and do that. There'd maybe be 4 or 5 on railway lines along the works. Oh, you didn't have any steps, you had to hoist yourself into the truck, you know, and then the windy driller would start and you'd hold the handle, then of course you had to get out and get into the next one to do that, you know, there was no steps.
Head Wrightson developed unique skills in the production of dock and harbour equipment, which began in the 19th century.
Oh my God, that was right down the river, on the riverside, as you can imagine, so they were ready to be launched when they were finished. And used to crawl in a hole and round to drill holes. So you had all this piping and the machine to pull through. Imagine all the holes inside to get in and where the water would go through when the dock gates were made, when they were operational. Yeah, we just used to do it.
I'd done a lot of pressure vessels, and when we were doing the pressure vessels, we had to go down the pressure vessels to do the last dished end. We had your welding gear, your cleaning gear, your extractor fans, your light, and then sometimes with that narrow, you had to pull it out by your legs. You crawled inside, but you couldn't crawl backwards. Then you had to put a rope on your leg and pull it out by your leg to get you out when you finished the job.
We're talking about Trafalgar Street now. It was only 10 minutes from where I worked. When it was Ernie Lister, he said, "Do you know it's raining?" I said, "Oh, it isn't. I've got washing out." He said, "Oh, go and nip home and take it in."
In 1968, John Eccles became the last managing director of Head Wrightson. But in the 1950s, as a young man, he managed and helped modernise workshops based across the river in Stockton. The experience was useful to understanding the key elements of production.
Our shop floor performance was second to none in the management of that shop floor, which was mainly done by foremen, not by any rather exalted... No, we didn't have many managers sitting in the office. I used to go to see Harry Thompson and say, "Come on, Harry, how many tons of steel are going to come in the door and how many tons of steel are going to go out today?" And he would always have his book, and he would know that was the question I was going to ask him, and he would know the answer. And if we got more than a certain number of tons coming in and more than a certain number of tons going out, then we were having a good day. You need people who really know what is going on in detail. And the team I had at Stockton Steel Foundry and the others, they all knew exactly what was going on.
The nearby Stockton Forge was a close-knit and dedicated community. It was at the hub of a mining revolution. The forge designed and built new equipment for many mines across Britain. Norman Tolson, the template maker, worked on many of them.
Well, they did all the converting the coal mines. They modernised the coal mines in England, and they nearly all the work seemed to come to Head Wrightson. For a start, the headgears, what we call the pit headgears, were the big wheel. They were all modernised. The cages were modernised. The conveyor belts bringing the coal in and out, we used to do all them.
The forge had mining experts like Barry Preece, a construction engineer.
That entailed really going around different plants that we were building and troubleshooting. All sorts of different plants we went to. And troubleshot came back to the drawing office and the works and sorted things out. I enjoyed it. It was very hard work because it was a lot of weekend work. I got married in the meantime and we were having a family, and it wasn't the sort of job that you wanted to spend your life doing, although I loved it. If I'd been a single man, I don't think I'd have ever got married with that sort of job.
Barry eventually became a successful sales manager. The steel industry was also expanding. Heads built many of the furnaces. Head Wrightsons provided all you needed to make steel, including torpedo ladle cars.
But everybody worked hard, really hard. Everybody wanted to work hard. There was no health and safety at then. Amazing what we used to do. Building a blast furnace, it's riveted, where you had to put drifts in and square the holes up and everything. And you finished up standing on 2 drifts. Well, there was one staging up now and everything. Cost a fortune. Nobody ever got hurt. People were careful. But you were swinging a big hammer, 7-pound hammer.
We used to see the big boilers sometimes going up the street on the lorries. We wondered how they'd travel. They were so big, they were massive. You couldn't sort of believe the size of them.
But yes, everybody, they came out, it was a spectacle. Everybody came out and looked with awe. What on earth's that? And that's what we, at Wrightsons, they built that.
I remember that big vessel coming out of Ed Wrightson's and coming up to Trafalgar Street, and the way that there was houses, about half a dozen houses, and the big vessel, it looked as if it was going to tip any minute. It just seemed as if it was going to go over into the houses. But I mean, that was tremendous.
You see, to get out of Ed Wrightson's, you couldn't get out unless you went over a bridge. So there's a Victoria Bridge into Stockton, there's a railway bridge to go up Thornaby Road, and there's a railway bridge to go down the Middlesbrough, by the town hall there. You had to go out of 3 bridges before you could get out of the place.
But the scale of what lay ahead would present even greater challenges. The prospect of electricity that would be too cheap to meter stirred the nation. Head Wrightson saw potential in the emerging nuclear power industry, even though they knew very little about the technology, and the Wrightsons recruited leading scientists to help them design the work. The contracts created thousands of jobs.
We got into the nuclear power industry in a way that we went into quite a lot of different businesses through the enthusiasm and the marketing skills of the Wrightsons, notably John Wrightson, who was always game to take on something new and exciting, and was a very persuasive person and who knew a lot of people, and he got us into the nuclear power plant company, which was the first consortium we were in and which built Bradwell.
Head Wrightson had developed advanced welding technology, and this earned them the contract for 8 boilers and then more for later plants. It provided years of work for the town. How would they get the 800-ton boilers out of Thornaby?
But it was a work of art, it really was. And that was all due to a chap who came in, new nuclear power. We were going to build them plates small and take them down there and rebuild them down there. And he said, when he had a look at the place, he said, why don't you launch them, take them down by river and sea? And when Sir John heard that, that was it, you launched them. Find out how, and we did, and a big success.
We we had a very imaginative and practical foreman called Walter Tranter, and he designed, probably on the back of an envelope or on a piece of paper, slipway timbers. We still employed shipwrights in those days, and they built a slipway, and we all rather held our breath when we saw the boiler on the slipway. Would it actually slide elegantly into the river? And it did, so that was fine. And so did all the subsequent boilers.
I was out in the apprentice school, the first launch. We all had our white overalls on. Said, you stop there and stop anybody from going down there. So this big car come up. So I stopped this big car. Well, unknown to me, it was Lady Wrightson going to launch it. So I got my behind kicked for that, for stopping the car. Anyway, the bottle, we called it the bottle when it got launched. And the tide back, everybody got drenched. They all stood there in all the fancy clothes and that, watching all the launch go down, and all the backwasher water come up and drenched everybody. That was the first big launch we had down there for the nuclear. And later on, they done all the nuclear boilers, and they just launched everything. It was a great achievement watching them go down the Tees at that particular time.
When you're launching 800 ton into the River Tees and towing it out to Africa as a dock gate or something like that nature, tremendous achievements, not seen anymore.
Wrightson had as good a safety record as any other firm, but given the nature of the work, accidents were inevitable.
And when we were on the machines, there was a tap full of white water to keep it cool. And this one night, it was about 5:15, going to go home, and they called him Miss Dougie Lund, our charge, and he said, Connie, hang on a bit, I want to see that. He said, move that white water tap, you can move it. So I moved it. As I moved it, my overall caught in the teeth of the machine, and you know what he did? He held the belt tight like that. He stopped it till I could put myself out. I just tore all the overall and a bit of my skin, and all I could say was, what are we going to do? Buy coupons for your overall. Straight down to the boss, 5 to 5, get your coupons for your new overall next week. So I was very lucky then. You see, there was a lot of narrow escapes.
You ask how many around the town that's left living now, and there's not many old welders, you know. They all had breathing problems. There's a lot of them died very young. It was a dangerous atmosphere at the time because the ventilation was very poor, and the welding fumes. You had no extractors at the time. You had no masks at the time. I find myself very fortunate at my age to be still going strong after what we'd put up with.
The dressing or fettling yard. These photos were taken in the late 1920s, but conditions didn't change until the 1950s.
The dressing yard was all out in the open. In the winter, the men used to have fires to warm the tools and just work outside. You know, they worked out in snow, in all weathers. Our back windows of the offices used to look right onto it. You know, and especially in the winter when the fires were going and, thinking of men working out there in all weathers, we thought it was terrible, but they got used to it. I mean, the foreman was called Ducky Harris because they said he'd work when he was on the tools. Nothing stopped him working.
But the early 1960s saw major improvements in working conditions at Teesdale, such as purpose-built fabrication shops. And for the first time, health and safety was being regarded seriously across working Britain. For some young labourers, though, conditions were often not as ideal as those a tradesman or apprentice might enjoy.
At 9 o'clock you used to get a cup of tea, but you weren't allowed to sit down, you had to stand where you were working. Why? There's what point is sitting down for 10 minutes, having a rest? Surely you'd get more work done, but you had to stand up. The tradesmen didn't treat you bad, but they were on a lot more money. I was only on I think it was £5 a week, boy labourer, and I was doing a man's job. And I didn't find out it was against the law till later on. I had an accident, and the union man didn't bother putting a claim in for me because the management found out I shouldn't have been doing the job. I trapped my finger in a load and disfigured my finger. When I left, I got a job on the council in the parks department outside grass cutting, and it was like heaven from hell. From going from hell into the boss just said, "Here's a pair of shears for your first job. Walk around Thornaby, cutting under the street signs."
You're a person of the era that you were in, and if you're a 15, 16-year-old apprentice and you come into an environment, you are of that environment. And it was an era when you did what you were told. Your parents said it's good for you to have a trade, so you stick in and get a trade. And then as you go through, you live in the paternal environment, I suppose, of the head Wrightson's organisation. And so it was a paternal environment.
And the Wrightsons themselves were paternalistic. And this enhanced the lives of the workers in many ways. Staff were invited to a biennial garden party at Neasham Hall. This is the 1932 celebration of John Wrightson's coming of age. For years the event became an expression of continuity and stability. The firm provided popular facilities for the workers' spare time, and this all contributed to a sense of community and belonging.
It was a good social life. You don't know that many people. Some of the young ones decided after the war that they would like to start a youth club. So they organised a trip to Whitley Bay. So Mr. Mars got to know and he said, "Right, we'll pay for the buses and we'll pay for the lunch." And we all had a trip out to Whitley Bay. I mean, anything we wanted, like, when we wanted to start a dramatic society, they gave us so much money, which was very popular. We used to make all our own scenery. Oh, we had some good times, It was all professionally done. We used to have a man on the door with his tails and...
From its very earliest days, Head Wrightson became international. No doubt about that.
You name it, in heavy industry, medium to heavy industry, and we could have a slice of it. There was a piece of action in there somewhere for us. We were just finding out what it was.
Well, in the safe at Head Wrightson, there were some Manaus harbour debentures, very decorative and worth nothing. And they had been accepted, except as memorabilia, they had been accepted in the days of Sir Thomas as part payment for building the harbour at Manaus, which is 1,000 miles up the Amazon.
Such efforts helped to put the small and relatively unknown town of Thornaby on the map. The 1875 Empress Bridge across the Ganges in India and its Thornaby engineers were immortalised by Rudyard Kipling.
Standing on 7 and 20 brick piers. Each one of those piers was 24 feet in diameter, capped with red Agra stone, and sunk 80 feet below the shifting sand of the Ganges bed. Above them was a rail.
The President of India, Dr. Prasad, thanks Peter Wrightson at the opening of a blast furnace built by the firm. This vast complex enabled India to produce its own steel.
Generally, it was like going out into, not quite desert, but not far off.
Clear.
That's another thing you've sort of jogged my memory.
Ken Home and Eric Brown worked together in India during the 1960s.
And we had people from Thornaby working on that site until about 1969, perhaps 70. 15 Head Wrightsons had a presence on that site for some 15 years, which sort of, I think, shows that we really did have some staying power.
The Head Wrightson team on the site comprised of 8 engineers, together with 3 of their wives. Following that, we had about 100 Indian engineers working on the site, and over 10,000 Indian tradesmen and labourers. The site was very labour intensive. Excavation was all done manually. We had one excavation about 35 foot deep. We had 850 people working on it. They worked as families. They raked the earth into wickerwork baskets, and it was slowly zigzagged up to the top of the hill, about 100 feet, changing hands at each stage. And the concrete was taken to the job site by ladies with tin pans on their heads. And for a large excavation, we had up to 200 ladies forming a continuous chain, taking the concrete to the site.
No telephones, 3 hours from the office in Calcutta by rail, and over 6,000 miles from Thornaby. How did the project keep in touch with base?
I would write a message out,
Yes.
and I would give it to a junior office boy, put him on the train to Calcutta. He would go to Calcutta and he would pass it to you.
That's right.
What did you do?
We had to, depending how urgent it was, we had to put it into form for going by telegram, and then send the boy, the peon, to the General Post Office in Calcutta for it to be transmitted by telegram to England. And that perhaps was one of the safest, or perhaps best ways of getting, but it took, in total, it probably took 3 days.
3 days for you, so by the time I got it back at site, it was 5 days.
Oh, heck, by the time you got it back, it could be 5 days plus, yes.
In which case,
Yes.
if there were any decisions to be made, we made them on site and got on with it.
Whatever the problem was, it was resolved.
It was resolved before they
it-
got the answer
before
back.
they got which I think was a good thing in many ways, yes.
So it meant that if there were any problems that arose, either because of drawings or local conditions, we made the decisions at site and got on with it.
The family lived in India for 3 years. Their bungalow home was in a picturesque garden, a complete contrast to the Head Wrightson site back home in Thornaby. But they still decided to call their Indian home Teesdale.
We started there with our 3 children, and then my youngest son, Andrew, he was born in India. He was born in Calcutta.
Andy Holmes is now a director of his father's company. Soon he'll be off on one of his regular visits to India.
I'd like to go and talk to Tata about building a Jaguar plant in Saudi, but I don't know how prospective that is. But that project looks like it's progressing forward as well. So I think there's a number of things that we can talk to the companies in India about.
Thornaby's global traditions continue through Ken's own company, which has for 30 years forged engineering contracts worldwide.
It was exciting. It was so new to us. We'd not travelled abroad that way. And India is a very exciting place to be. And for myself, I was just a young 32-year-old. So it was a place to develop a great deal of confidence in one's ability to do work. You either did that or you sunk.
In the 1970s, Wrightson was still thriving on all fronts, but against a changing world. Barry Preece moved from the forge to become a successful sales manager. Here, he's photographed with colleagues to celebrate a major export to Mexico.
So when you'd identify that a new mine was being built or a new chemical plant was being built in Indonesia, you chased after it.
All these things go into the development of a plant before you actually get to actually bid it, never mind build it. So, you could spend maybe as much as £1 million in some instances in getting to the point of negotiation.
World events took their toll on British industry. The oil recession, inflation, the strong pound of the 1970s all affected the capacity of companies like Wrightson to trade. The firm had helped to rebuild our nationalised industries. Now they were slowly being run down.
We had a lot of it, but we were too widely spread to survive in the marketplace that was coming at us. On our own. We either had to reduce our scope, put all our resources behind a very limited range, much more limited range, or we had to go into a bigger company.
In 1977, Wrightson merged with a similar company nearby, the Davy Corporation. 10 years later, though, it closed for good.
Wrightson's today, in the site that it was and how it was laid out, couldn't survive. You need to tear it down and start off with a blank piece of paper.
Like the whole profile of Teesside changed, didn't it? If you looked at the fact that the manufacturing facilities were overtaken by, and even today, Great Britain does not have, or the United Kingdom does not have its product or its technology base that it had some 20 years ago. We've declined with our investment. You don't find apprentice schools like that existed in the days of Wrightson. You don't find those training situations any longer.
Today, there's not a trace left to show that Wrightson's works ever existed on Teesdale. Postmodern architecture sprang up soon after Mrs. Thatcher's visit. Financial centres and service industry now populate the 50-acre site. But Wrightson is far from forgotten. The celebrated local history group, made up of ex-Wrightson workers, rescued hundreds of the priceless photographs that were lost when Wrightson was torn down. The group is organising a workers' reunion to try and gather more photographs and memories for their collection.
Telling the story of Wrightson's is also telling the story of Thornaby. This story should be told, and and it was a good response from the people who actually were there. They have a story to tell, and it's up to us to listen to it.
We've got a lot more of the town council in.
How are you?
You must have that one there.
Yeah.
This is.
These go back to 1949.
Transporting them up by road, and that's the way that we got the order.
You got a job there as a
He went back on the tools.
didn't
he? Yeah, he did. Yeah.
Didn't he go back on the tools? Oh, he went back on the tools at Cleveland.
He did
Bridge,
night
yeah.
shifts and that sort of.
Albert Roxburgh, a toolroom fitter at Head Wrightson, is organising a book with the Teesside Industrial Memories project.
You build up strong companionships, which you remember. You remember them more than you remember some of the rougher times. People have got Head Wrightson's connections and have stuck together in a sense. They've kept contact with each other.
Where's he at now? Where's Ali Wardell. Yeah. On the Mesa Gresham. Yeah. I used to repair this bloody thing. I don't know who did it yet. He's a long-haired bugger there.
So the memories and the photographs are being urgently gathered and recorded for the benefit of future generations to appreciate in the exhibitions, books and films of tomorrow. For one day, Head Wrightson will be living memory no more.
Stockton Forge departmental cricket team.
Better watching telly, and you're 60.
That's my father, Jimmy Allsop, who was also in Ed Wrightson's band, 1953. I always remember the Bradwell boilers. Every time they launched the Bradwell boiler, or even Doc Gates, they used to take me down and watch the launches. And then years later, I worked on the Doc Gates myself. Worked quite a number of years on them, up until he retired of ill health. I think he was 63 when he retired because of ill health.
Head Wrightson and its workers have left a remarkable legacy, but often it's hidden or out of sight. The fabrication of Waterloo Station is a good example. The first Baronet, Sir Thomas Wrightson, was involved in the original London Underground. A century later, Head Wrightsons have provided much of the tunnel casing for the Victoria Line. The same expertise was used in Brazil for the São Paulo Underground and many other tunnels. Head Wrightson's workers built the massive Mark I radio telescope at Jodrell Bank. Astley Green pithead dates from 1898. This is the gang from Thornaby constructing it. Today, Astley Green is the only pit in Lancashire to survive, and it's been lovingly restored to a heritage centre by enthusiasts. And this is Fulham Bridge, but few of the local residents would ever imagine that this famous London landmark originated in Thornaby-on-Tees.